Hello, good evening. My name is Cameron Bertuzzi. I'm here with Dr. Luke Barnes, and we are talking about the fine-tuning argument. We're responding to Arvin Ash. He's a popular YouTuber. I don't know if he's an atheist or an agnostic. He's no fan of the fine-tuning argument. I think that's fair to say. And he produced a video recently, and we got some clips lined up for us tonight for Luke to comment on. But he posted a video recently where he critiqued or tried to critique the fine-tuning argument. And it's got 200,000 views, and that, I mean, what else? How else should we introduce this video, Luke? Why did you want to do this in the first place?
I'm not about sort of refuting every, commenting on every video on YouTube, but someone sent me this one, and at the time it had 80,000 views, and now
It's up to 200,000.
Yeah, 200,000. I don't have many nice things to say, so maybe people will be entertained by that.
I've also linked in the description of this video a blog post that Dr. Barnes has written in response to the video itself, and a lot of the clips that I'll be playing today, he's also linked in his blog post and everything. So if you want to get some more detail or just maybe some other points that maybe weren't made in this video, then go check out his blog post, and also subscribe to his blog and get all the updates and everything when he posts new stuff. So that'd be pretty cool for you to do.
Cool.
Also subscribe to this channel, Capturing Christianity, if you haven't already, and you're interested in this type of stuff, fine-tuning arguments, God's existence, arguments for and against God. If you're interested in any of that at all, this channel is definitely for you, and you want to subscribe. With that down, Luke, give the audience just a quick introduction of who you are for anyone who may not know. Some people that are going to be watching this for the first time as a response to Arvin, which Arvin, by the way, I would love to have you on the channel for a dialogue, maybe even with Luke himself. I don't know. If you're watching this, then this is not an attack on you, your person. We don't know each other. This is all about the ideas that you express in your video, and that's what we'll be discussing tonight. But anyways, get back to you, Luke. So give the audience just a quick rundown of who you are.
So yeah, I'm a lecturer in physics at Western Sydney University, and so when I was a PhD student at Cambridge was when I started looking into all this fine-tuning stuff. And I'm a cosmologist and an astrophysicist by sort of trade. But I've now sort of published a number of papers, research papers on the fine-tuning of the universe for life, and I'm the author, inevitable plug, with Geraint Lewis, who's my colleague at the University of Sydney, of A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos, with Cambridge University Press. It was from 2016. And so this is one of my research fields, mostly within the astrophysics of it, of just let's look at this as a scientist, which is what I am. But I've published a couple of things in philosophy journals as well, trying to look into that side. I'm not a professional philosopher, but I'm very interested in those questions.
Yeah, but the thing that's sort of going to be important for the audience to know tonight is that he is an active working scientist. So he's a cosmologist, and that's that's his field. So this is all just right in his wheelhouse, and that's why it's great to have a professional comment on this type of stuff instead of just me, an amateur apologist, or someone who's a YouTuber. That's essentially what happened with Arvin. He's a YouTuber. He's got some background, some interest in these things, but when you come out and you make some claims that, anyways, it's going to be interesting. Let's get to the first clip tonight, and then we'll get some comments and we'll get the ball rolling. So here we go. Here's clip number 1.
Until 350 years ago, there was a distinct demarcation between what people observed on Earth and what people saw up in the sky. There did not seem to be any connection. Things that happen on Earth could at least be seen and explained, at least in terms of cause and effect. The heavens seemed to be an utter mystery. The motions of planets, although predictable, did not appear to follow the same patterns as objects here on Earth. To many, this was the sign of the hand of a creator. It must be God that ruled over the universe, controlling the movements of these heavenly bodies. And to gaze at the stars was to bear witness to the majesty of God's design.
All right, so what do you have to say about this clip?
So this is a classic let's just set up the people in the past as straw men so we can knock them over. So obviously we don't believe all of that stuff now. So if they were wrong about that stuff, then they must be wrong about God, right? If they were wrong about, they thought their science pointed to God, but they were wrong about the science. So everyone must be wrong about this whole God thing. But the history is just nonsense. I mean, it's really, I mean, we're off to a terrible start. I'm not a historian, but I've read enough Aristotle to know that that's none of that was, well, it is true they saw a difference between the earth and the heavens, but what they concluded from that was, oh, I guess there's no cause and effect up there. It's just an utter mystery. What they said was the heavens must be made out of different stuff. There's the four elements here on earth: earth, fire, wind, water. And so it sort of moves and slows down and stops. And heavens, they keep going around, so they must be made of something else, a fifth thing, quintessence. It's not a mystery. It's just they proposed what they needed to within their framework to explain what happened in the heavens. But the more important thing is there's a connection there between we don't know what's happening in the heavens. Therefore, to many, this was a sign of a hand of a creator. That's not the argument that, well, I mean, it's hard to know what people thought, right? People, just everyone, people. But if you look at all the major thinkers about God, starting, you go back to, doesn't matter whether they're pagan or Jewish or Christian or Islamic or, from Plato all the way through, no one's making that argument. No one says that we don't know how the heavens work, therefore God
this is such a mystery, therefore.
Yeah. I mean, it's not Aristotle's argument for a prime mover, for example. His was, there seems to be motion in the universe, but things don't move all on their own, so there must be a perfect source of motion. That's a very rough, presentation of it. If you want a modern version of that, let's see Edward Faze's book, most recent book. But, I mean, the argument doesn't even make sense. It would suggest that the heavens have a creator, but the earth doesn't need one. No one thought that, right? The heavens are a mystery, so the heavens need a creator. The earth isn't a mystery, so the earth doesn't need a creator. The whole thing it's a straw man. You set up this sort of obviously ludicrous picture of the past, of past thinkers, so you can then just knock it over and look really intelligent.
Well, and another thing that's sort of interesting that's going on, sort of the subtext of this video, this clip, and I guess the video more broadly, is that he's got these really nice graphics. He's got this like kind of like the music underlaying in the background is kind of like very ethereal and atmospheric. And so it just sounds like he's just like spilling out all of these facts about history and like this is just what it was. And like people were thinking this, and then they were making these types of inferences, and those inferences were really bad. And now we're like, we know better now. They just like, I don't know. There's some kind of like, I want to just call it a rhetorical. There's definitely a rhetorical sort of persuasive aspect to this video that like if you just like break it down, if you just read the transcript and you read everything like the things that he says written out, it's a completely different experience. When you're watching it and you're kind of like, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with like any TV show, or if you're watching something on Netflix, something that's really well produced, you can just watch it and be like, yeah, this is how it all is. This is fact. But it's just, I mean, as Luke just pointed out, it doesn't seem to be like all of that was just kind of like taken out of nowhere. Like, where is he getting any of this information from? It's really interesting. It's not a good start.
There's almost no references, and we'll get back to the exception to that later on.
All right, here is clip number 2.
Ironically, Newton himself did not view his equations as negating the need for God. To him, the nature of gravity, which he described as action at a distance, meaning a force that acts on things without ever touching it, was evidence that God still had a hand in the universe.
All right, so this is a claim about something that Newton believed and said. And so that should be relatively easy to like go and fact check, right?
Yeah. I'm amazed at how much, I mean, sure, right off Aristotle, but physicists would at least give Newton,
the
at
time of
least go to
day.
the effort of reading it. So I've heard, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I did a couple of blog posts about this. Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he'll praise Newton all day long, but if he needs to have a shot at Newton at religion, then he's happy to just throw Newton under the bus, and without the slightest clue about what Newton was actually saying. But so there was a quote there on the it was in quotation marks on screen there, which said.
I can try to pull it up.
Words. Yeah, no, it's all right. Gravity affecting something without touching it is evidence of God's influence. Let me actually read to you one of the most famous things that Newton ever wrote. It was actually the second edition of his Principia. It's called the General Scholium. What he wrote was, hitherto, and I'll try to smooth out the oldie-timey English.
Yeah.
We've explained the phenomena of the heavens and of our sea by the power of gravity, but we have not yet assigned the cause of this power. Right? Now, if Arvin Ash is right here, he's about to go, therefore God, right? But what he says is, in fact, a couple of lines later, but hitherto I have not been able to discover the cause of those properties of gravities from phenomena, from observations, and I frame no hypothesis. Right? It's so famous. It's a Latin phrase, hypothesis non fingo, which every sort of scientist knows. Is if you don't know, just say I don't know, and that's exactly what Newton does. It's what you're supposed to do as a scientist. I don't know what causes gravity, and I frame no hypothesis. I invent no theory beyond it. I don't have the observations to tell me what produces gravity, so we don't know. And that's what he does. That's one of the most famous things he ever said. So there's nothing in here which points to I don't know what gravity does, therefore God. And previously he does believe in God, of course, but what he says is we know God by his most wise and excellent contrivances of things and final causes. We admire him for his perfections, but we reverence and adore him on account of his dominion. So what he's saying there is it's most obvious to see God where we see amazing things in nature, and we admire God for God's perfections. But, we reverence and adore him on account of his dominion, the fact that he is, powerful over all things. So it's not that you pick out the one bit of nature that you don't understand and say, hey, look, I found God there. It's God does everything. So, again, you'd think Newton would get a bit of respect, but he just gets thrown under the bus.
All right. Do you have anything else to say about the Newton clip before we move on to the mass of the neutrino?
I tweet this. I almost should put it like regularly. If I could find a program that would just tweet this once a week, I would. It's just scientists suck at history. All of us, even the ones who have read enough history to know a bit. It's the classic sort of Dunning-Kruger. We're all at the peak of we think we know something and we actually don't. There was a really great post recently by a historian, and he was reviewing. So there's an astronomer, Mario Livio, who'd written a biography of Galileo, and what this historian was saying was, professional historians will completely ignore this because it's rubbish and it's at a popular level. It's not scholarly, and they couldn't be bothered refuting all of it. But then to the people in the public who will read this thinking that it's good history, and it just isn't. So get your history from historians of science, not just from scientists, because we sort of read a bit and try to catch up. But get some proper historians.
I wanted to say real quick that I'm noticing that Luke is kind of cutting in and out in terms of the quality. So some of the words that he's saying kind of are mashing together. But as I've been listening, and I'm able to pick out everything that he's saying. So I'm not going to make any changes or do anything. I just wanted to make note of it. I hear it, but I think it's okay for the purpose of the show. So that is kind of a subtle way of hinting at Luke. Get a better internet connection, please.
Get a better country to live in. I think it's all
right, here's
it's Tuesday afternoon here, by the way. It's very nice.
Here is clip number 3. Here we go.
Many scientists point out that some of these are so finely tuned that even a slight variation would have resulted in a universe devoid of life. They point out, for example, that the mass of a neutrino is about 2 times 10 to the negative 37 kilograms. It has been shown that if this mass was off by just 1 decimal point, that is, if it was 2 times 10 to the negative 36 kilograms, or 2 times 10 to the negative 38 kilograms, life would not exist, because if the mass was too high, the additional gravity would cause the universe to collapse. If the mass was too low, galaxies could not form because the universe would have expanded too fast.
All right, what do you want to say about this one?
None of that was correct. This is basically it's a video about fine tuning. It's 15 minutes long. He discusses one fine tuning example and gets it wrong. I mean, so I have a close friend at Sydney University who, not Geraint, another guy, who's doing public understanding of science and physics education especially. And he read my blog post, and he's read the book before, so he knows this field, reasonably well. Who sent me a series of messages, just sort of behind the scenes, saying, I'm putting so much, anything I do, a talk to the public or doing something online, I spend so much time talking to experts, making sure it's all right, and just double checking everything. And then this guy has obviously, who knows what he's read, but he's never actually checked it with anyone, and just throws it up on the internet with some nice graphics and a good voiceover, and hey presto, then it was 80,000 views. Now it's 200,000 views. I mean,
some of his videos are in the millions.
Yeah, it's quite depressing if you're actually trying to tell the public about science, that something that's this bad.
Well, let's get into the details. So, yeah.
So, the neutrino. So there's a set of fundamental particles. When we break the stuff in the universe apart, we get down to the fundamental particles that, so far as we know, aren't made of anything else. So there's a sort of famous plot of them. So the stuff we're made out of is the proton, the neutron, and the electron. But actually the proton and the neutron aren't fundamental. They're made out of even smaller things. If we looked inside of those, so to speak, they're made of up quarks and down quarks. So all you need to know is that the Lego set of our universe has 3 bits in it in terms of making us. There's a bunch of other stuff that turns up in high energy experiments. And in particular, for the electron, it seems to have this sort of weird cousin called the neutrino, and it also has older brothers, and they have weird cousins. It's never mind. There is this thing called the neutrino, which interacts very weakly with the stuff we see around us. It's a particle. It has no charge. They're produced in enormous amounts by the sun. There's a whole bunch of them passing through your hand right now, but they don't interact. They just go straight through. Immediately, choosing this as your example of fine-tuning is really weird, because fine-tuning is supposed to be about the physics that makes a universe life-permitting. And that physics is obviously the stuff that makes a life form by interacting with itself. And the whole point of a neutrino, the thing about a neutrino is it doesn't interact very much. So immediately going to the neutrino as your example is immediately stacking the deck against fine-tuning. But even then, he's got his numbers wrong. It's not the case that if you go up by 1 order of magnitude, then you close the universe. You have to go up by a couple of orders of magnitude. And it's not that he's got them the wrong way around. So here's the actual limits in the actual scientific literature. If you took the mass of the neutrinos and took them up by sort of 2 orders of magnitude, then the formation of galaxies would be strongly suppressed for various reasons. Basically, neutrinos travel really fast, and so it's hard to squish them together into galaxies. But he says there's a lower bound that you don't get any galaxies if the neutrino mass is too small. That he has just completely made up. That I have no idea. I've never read that. I don't know who made that mistake first, but that's completely false. Neutrinos could be massless, have a mass of 0, and everything would be fine. I don't know what his source is. I mean, he could have gone to any, there's a number of great books on fine-tuning by scientists. Martin Rees's book, Just Six Numbers, Paul Davis's book, his most recent one from sort of 2005 called the Cosmic Jackpot or the Goldilocks Zone, depending on where you are. I think he's pulled this neutrino example out of an older book of Paul Davis's, The Accidental Universe, but that's from 1982, so I don't know why he's pulled that one out. He could have read our book, of course, just to plug that again. But instead, who knows where he's got this from, and he's just got it wrong. One example in the entire video, and you couldn't even bother looking up a decent reference for it, let alone, you're doing a science education channel. You should be able to read the scientific literature and understand it. I've written a review paper, 30 odd papers cited in it. Sorry, I seem to have frozen again. There's all of the papers in the scientific literature that you could be reviewing. But instead of that, he just sort of pulled something out of nowhere. Yeah, it's really depressing.
It is curious, like where is he getting his information from? And it's obvious. I think it's obvious that after you watch this video, and then also just like go and I mentioned Luke's blog post that I've linked in the description here, but he goes through it sort of in detail. And also if you're kind of wanting a deeper analysis breakdown of like the figures and everything, Luke does go through all of that on his blog. So if you are missing the numbers and you want to get the actual science behind everything, then the blog is probably the place that you want to go. But yeah, it's just interesting that like he could have gone to so many different sources. And I mean, there are way more interesting instances of fine tuning to me that just gravity itself. Like you could just talk about gravity, the strength of gravity. Yeah. And that's kind of easy to understand. And I know that's not your favorite one to use. But I mean, there's so many others. Yeah, well, there's so many different ones to talk about. Oh, I should mention that we've even done an episode on that. All of the different cases of fine tuning, the evidence for fine tuning, rather, and that's one. With a fine tuning argument, that's like one aspect of it. That's like the beginning stages. Like, let's set up the argument. Let's figure out what fine tuning is, how we know that fine tuning is a thing. And then the second stage is like, okay, what do we do with this information? What's the best explanation on offer for the fact that there is a life permitting universe, given what we know about fine tuning? That's sort of a stage 2 of this argument. But stage 1, I don't know. It's just, you gotta get this stuff right, especially if you're making a video critiquing the argument.
And choosing the neutrino. I mean, the whole point is about the physics of life. The neutrino is the most obscure, unheard of particle in the universe. It doesn't do any. I mean, it's not interacted with any of the matter around us since the universe was about 1 second old. Like, you could talk about the proton, for Pete's sake.
Or at least like the cosmological constant, the fact that the universe is expanding. I mean, that one also, like, visually, he could have done a whole lot of cool visual things with that one. The universe expanding or contracting, and he had a video. I don't know how he got this video of a globe with like hands coming around the globe. It's like you have access to videos. You could have done. All right. Anyways, all right. Let's move on to the next one. So this one, I'm sure you're gonna have a lot to say. All right. Here we go.
The argument exaggerates the idea of fine-tuning by using misleading units of measurements to make fine-tuning seem much more unlikely than it may be. You'll see, for example, that the mass of neutrinos is expressed in kilograms. These things are so small that any fluctuation expressed in kilograms would be a huge fluctuation. The kilogram measurement for the neutrino is arbitrary. A better measurement would be electron volts or even picograms.
Okay, so
just quickly, there's 2 clips there that got kind of joined together. There's an analogy in the middle about a basketball player, but the point that he made was just made in those sentences. Oh, jeez. First of all, he expressed the mass of the neutrino in kilograms. We all remember that, right? Anyway, so yeah, this is telling. Let me break it down for Cameron here. telling a physicist that you need to take units into account is like telling a photographer to take the lens cap off their camera. It is the most basic thing that we do. I mean, literally day one of your physics undergraduate degree, you will just make sure you know how to deal with units properly in your first lab session. That'll be what that's about. And then you're pretty much sorted from there. So to say that all of the people, who've ever discussed fine tuning didn't realize, oh, hey guys, guess what? Actually, these units, you're not going to believe this, but they're actually arbitrary. We just pick a convenient unit from whatever situation we're in. And so talking about the size of a certain change in a given set of units is just arbitrary is just the most patronizing, ridiculous comment. That it's like, it would be like telling a room full of professionals the insights that you guys, not as a professional photographer, by the way, here's a central insight, guys. You got to take the lens cap off. I mean, it is just so.
It's a good analogy.
It is completely clueless. And the other thing that's weird is at the end he says, actually, it would be better if he used electron volts or even picograms. So he stuffs up the argument himself. You can't say that the correct argument is unit systems of units, physical systems of units are arbitrary, so you can't express a fine-tuning claim in any particular system of units. You have to use dimensionless quantities, which everyone has done since Brandon Carter started this field in 1973. But then he doesn't make that point. He says, oh, it'd be better if you used picograms. No, they're arbitrary as well. I mean, electron volts, they're arbitrary. He stuffs up the units himself in the process of making the supposedly base and patronizing point that physicists need to think about units.
I'm trying to
terrible.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what his point was, and it seems to me like he wants to say that it seems like there's a whole lot more fine tuning than there actually is, and that's because the units of measurement just seem like if you go up 2 orders of magnitude or go down any order of magnitude, it just seems like, you've got to get it in this really small area, but it's not actually that way because the units that we're using are not the right units. That seems to me like kind of the point that he's making there. Does that?
The straw man that he's aiming at is one where you say, if the mass of the neutrino was 10 to the minus 36 times bigger or smaller kilograms, 10 to the minus 36 kilograms bigger or smaller, then you would have a universe that's a really small, so the probability is really small. Now, no physicist has ever made that argument in discussing fine tuning because we know how to deal with units, just like Cameron knows how to take off a lens cap. So it's just completely aimed at a straw man. We know we need to deal with dimensionless units. We all do. Every paper on fine tuning does. When they start, so the point is to compare the life permitting range to some range of possibilities, like comparing the bullseye on a dartboard to the whole dartboard or the whole wall or whatever. So it's about a ratio between two things, and you have to be able to justify both. You can't just say, here's the range of life-emitting values. You then have to say, and here's the range of possible values. But that's exactly what we've been doing in the literature the whole time. So it's just it would be patronizing the same mistake himself when he tells us we should use picograms.
All right, I'll leave it there. Let's move on to clip number 5. The constants can't be arbitrary is the title that I gave this one.
Most of the constants of the universe could not really be any arbitrary number. They're going to hover around some value close to what they actually are.
So I'm actually going to leave this one up. Just anyone wants to pause it and actually look at these numbers and what he's mentioning here. So yeah, what do you have to say about this one?
He just pulled that out of nowhere. I mean, that is a claim that he makes with no attempt at justification, no citation, and which every physicist would say is false. most of the constants in the universe could not really be any arbitrary number. They are going to hover around some value close to what they actually are. How can he possibly know that? These are fundamental constants. What that means is that herein the most fundamental equations that we have to describe the universe. There is nothing underneath them in all of our current knowledge in terms of actual scientific theories that we've tested. If there was, they would be the fundamental laws. The whole point of a fundamental constant is that there's no deeper explanation for why it is what it is, because it's there in the fundamental equations. This is as deep as physics has gone so far. There's nothing more we at the moment are able to say. And so the fact that it's called a fundamental constant, it precisely means that there is absolutely no way to say why it is what it is rather than something else. So saying, oh, it's going to hover around some value close to what they actually are is just made up. It's just completely made up.
What's interesting to me, he later on in the video, and this is clip 10, we haven't got there yet, but he makes mention of something like a theory of everything. But why would you need a theory of everything if the constants can't be varied, or if it's all just got to be where they are? Yeah. Why would you need a theory of everything in the first place? That's going to explain why these constants are where they're at.
Yeah. I mean, that's a different claim. If he was claiming, look, I believe that when we get a final theory of everything, these numbers couldn't have been different. You can claim that if you like. I'm going to ask you what your evidence for that is, because you can't say that and a multiverse. The whole point of a multiverse theory is that these numbers could and in fact are different, could be and are different elsewhere or before us or wherever, somewhere else in the universe. You wouldn't need that, and you couldn't possibly have that if you can't go out there and change the electron mass, you know.
All right, let's move on to the next clip. This one is about presuming a narrow definition of life. He says that the fine-tuning argument presumes a narrow definition of life. Here we go.
The fine-tuning argument also concludes that the universe must be fine-tuned based on the observation that if one of its properties were any different, life could not exist. It has to have exactly the properties that it has. The problem with this statement is that it presents a narrow definition of life based on the anthropic view that life has to be of the same kind that we see on Earth, in a universe that has properties of our universe. Anyone who insists that our form of life is the only conceivable life would be making a claim based on no evidence and no theory.
So just to be clear, again, we've taken something from about 6 minutes into the video and about 12 minutes into the video, but they're on the same topic of whether life could be the same. Again, the timestamps are in my blog post. There's so much, almost every sentence is just a minefield of stuff that's wrong in this. I mean, there's a central point there that we have to consider other ways the life could have been, but the idea that we haven't is just complete ignorance of the fine-tuning literature. So let me go through it. So he says the fine-tuning argument concludes that the universe must be fine-tuned based on the observation that if one of its properties were different, life could not exist. It has to have exactly the properties that it has. Nope. It doesn't have to have exactly the properties that it has. There are always open windows. You could have slightly different properties. In some cases, you can change two properties together and you get sort of a band of life-permitting universes in parameter space. So that's not. Sorry, that's a straw man. No one's saying it has to be exactly the same. But then the problem with this statement is that it presumes a narrow definition of life based on the anthropic view that life has to be the kind we see on Earth. And the only thing I can conclude from that is he has no idea what the term anthropic means. Like, not the first clue. Because I've read an awful lot in this field, right? Philosophy and physics. No one uses the term anthropic that way. No one means by anthropic that life has to be the kind we see on Earth. Not what anyone means by that term. Even the term I've done blog posts on this and it's in the book as well. The term has ballooned out in weird ways. Carter uses it in a slightly different way to Barrow and Tipler. And there's, participatory anthropic principles. Even in that sort of over-swollen, engorged definition of this term, no one says that that's what it means. And in particular, so Martin Rees, he's the Astronomer Royal, very famous cosmologist, author of Just Six Numbers, which go and read that, says, quote, even for the most open-minded science fiction writer, life or intelligence requires the emergence of some generic complex structures. So as we point out in our book, we're not really talking about life as we know it. As a physicist, we can't predict the universe on this sort of level of detail. I'm looking at some trees outside. We don't have a physics model for a tree. They don't turn up in our simulations of the universe. We're really talking about the generic conditions that life is going to need, like the universe has to make some sort of structure and it has to last more than half a second. And there has to be some way of building structure in some sense. You've got to, in our case, it's the periodic table that does that. There's got to be something like that in the universe. There's nothing as detailed, and no fine-tuning argument could possibly say anything along the lines of, the life has to be the same as life we see on Earth. That's just a complete straw man, which he, ironically, it's a claim he is making based on no evidence and no theory.
Well, when I think about the claim that he's making here, every time that I've heard a cosmologist or a professional on this topic, like Robin Collins or yourself, or just basically anybody, they'll make the point that when you are considering the cases of fine-tuning themselves, it's like when you alter these figures, these constants, then what happens in some of these cases is like everything expands too far apart. So you have like these particles, maybe you get some particles, but these particles are light years apart. And like, how are you going to get life if all of the particles are this far apart? Or maybe you have a universe that is just completely filled with black holes. And it's like, you're not going to get any kind of life. I mean, if it's silicone-based life or some other kind of like weird-looking life or made out of some different chemicals, that is not going to matter if the whole universe is just full of black holes. It's like that's the first thing that I think about, is that when you actually look at the cases of fine-tuning, this might be why he only chose the one case, the weird case of neutrinos, to talk about. Because if you look at the other cases of fine-tuning, it just becomes obvious that what we're talking about is like, you can't have life like at all in a universe where particles are light years, away from each other.
Yeah. Where no particle ever touches another particle. That's the sort of cases that we can consider and still make a fine-tuning case. So, again, it's just, as I watched this video the first time, it just gradually became obvious. He's read nothing. Well, we'll see in a minute. He's read one thing. But he's not read...
That we know of.
Yeah, well... Like, who knows what he's read? Because he doesn't cite... He cites one person, we'll see in a minute. But
True.
there's no... He starts critiquing an argument without ever really presenting it. And so he just jumps straight into, well, this is some stuff that people used to believe back in the day. Here's one fine-tuning example, which is an obscure one, and I'll present it wrong anyway. And now here's some objections that are just completely patronizing to any physicist who really does physics, or have been discussed by everyone who has ever talked about the fine-tuning argument.
All right, moving on to clip number 7, the strength of electromagnetism. Here we go.
For example, if the strength of electromagnetism was slightly larger or smaller, it would mean that atoms would be slightly smaller or larger, respectively. This probably would not preclude atoms from being formed or chemistry from taking place. Life could probably still exist, but it would just be different.
Yeah, so he's kind of making the same point here, is that like life could just be different than it looks on our Earth, and therefore fine-tuning argument fails in some way, somehow.
I mean, he uses the word slightly in there, and depending on how you define, think about the word slightly, the claim is kind of sufficiently small changes will produce sufficiently small effects. So yes, if you changed, the strength of electromagnetism is this famous number in physics. It's roughly 1 over 137, which is sort of an interesting number that comes out of physics. And if you twice the amount, it won't change things very much. But so slightly smaller or larger, what does that even mean there? But I love that he says this probably wouldn't preclude atoms from being formed or chemistry from taking place. But, haven't you read the literature? Have you looked up how much you can change that number? It's I think it's one of Rees's just 6 numbers. Or, there's been a whole lot of stuff published on how much you can change that number. He's completely ignored a whole bunch of it because if you change that number, it's the strength of electromagnetism. It's one of the 4 fundamental forces and one of the most important of the 4 fundamental forces. It's everywhere. It's not just in the size of atoms. It's in the way light interacts with atoms. It's in the stability of stars, in supernova explosion. It's there in galaxy formation. This number comes out. You can't just go changing it. Oh, I made my atom a bit bigger. Everything will probably be fine. So, for example, I said before the proton is made up of 2 up quarks and a down quark. Right, those 3 quarks. Right. So imagine you've got your quarks and you're making this proton. Right. It's sort of a principle. It's a very rough, hand-wavy way of putting it. But basically, any form of energy that you carry around with you adds to your mass because gravity sees all of it, roughly. That's if you want to think of E equals mc squared. This is all very hand-wavy for the professionals. So if in the proton, because it's charged, it's carrying around a charged electric field with it in the form of the binding energy, or in really sort of binding repulsion, actually, not binding repulsion, just the repulsion between the quarks in it. What that's saying is, if you missed that, was if you make the strength of electromagnetism larger, you make the proton heavier. And you don't have to make it much heavier before it's heavier than the neutron. And that makes a massive difference to our universe. It doesn't matter what atoms do. In our universe, the neutron, a free neutron in empty space, will decay into a proton because this has more mass, more energy, and it can turn into the other one. If you reverse that, then suddenly all of the stuff we're made of, which at one point was just protons in empty space, right? It's basically the way the universe started off with a bit of hydrogen, helium around as well. Suddenly, all those free protons, instead of just hanging around waiting to form into stars to power us and all of that sort of stuff, they all decay into neutrons, and suddenly you've got a neutron universe instead of a proton universe, and you get a very, very, very different universe. You probably don't get stars. You wouldn't get radiated, for various reasons, galaxies wouldn't form in the same way. And so this claim is just thrown out. There's no reference. I very much doubt that he's looked up any of the scientific literature about what changes in the strength of electromagnetism. He's just throwing it out there. Oh, you can make an atom a bit larger, maybe it'll be fine, and ignoring everything else that constant's involved in.
Okay, let's move on to the next clip here. And now, by the way, if I need to stop you and have you explain something else, I mentioned this before we started, I will, but I felt like you did a good job there. So thumbs up on that one. Here we go. Here's the next clip.
Physicist Victor Stenger did a study in 2000 where he varied these 4 constants to see what the potential universes would look like. He analyzed 100 universes in which he randomly varied the constants by 5 orders of magnitude above and 5 orders of magnitude below their actual values in our universe. What he found was that over half the universes would have stars that live at least 1 billion years.
So tell us about this study.
Yeah. Of all the
so you have this in scare quotes, right? You have it in this study, right? Which was really just a paper published in a non-academic or a non-scientific.
Yeah. It wasn't published in a scientific journal. He published it in the Philosophical Journal of a Humanist Society, Victor Stenger. And I think the reason's kind of obvious. It will get laughed out of any physics journal because it's, well, yeah, it's garbage. I was going to try and mince my words there, but no, it's rubbish.
In your blog post, there's so many different things that you said. You mentioned like 5 or 6 different things that Victor gets wrong in the paper itself, and that's why you're saying that it would get laughed out of an actual academic publishing company.
So in 2012, I published a review of the fine-tuning of the universe for life in the publications of the Astronomical Society of Australia, an actual journal, scientific journal. And if you look at the version of that that's on the archive, ARXIV, the free preprint version, there's an appendix which goes through in detail this particular study by Stenger. He also presents it in his book. So Victor Stenger wrote a book called The Folly of Fine-Tuning. I think that's what it was called. Or The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning. And my review paper was sort of in response to that book. So I've gone through all the details of why that study is nothing. Then feel free to go into that. But here's the short story: the simulations of the other universe. There's 8 high school level equations, like algebraic equations, in that model, and 6 of them he's got wrong. So one of them, 2 of them are just completely irrelevant. One of them is, he requires that the length of a day in the other universe has to be similar to the length of a day here, which is nothing that any fine-tuning case has ever put forward anywhere in the literature that I've read. I have no idea why those 2 equations are there. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
We have to pause on that for a second. That was a case of fine-tune. What is how? I don't understand this.
Exactly. There are papers in which sort of form sort of the basis behind fine-tuning, sort of, where you can derive some of the basic properties of stuff in our universe just right from the fundamental constants. So how big is an atom? We can start with the fundamental constants and derive with quantum mechanics the sort of the size of an atom. How big would we expect a planet to be? How big would we expect a star to be? There's some really nice papers on this. They're really good. There's a physicist called Don Page, who you might know, who's actually a Christian as well, but that's relevant. He's got a really great paper called "How Tall Is a Giraffe," where he asks, as a physicist, this is something you could do. What is the tallest thing that can run? So anyway, you can go look at that paper. It's a whole lot of fun. But you can do something like saying, okay, assuming a planet forms and it doesn't spin so fast that it breaks up, but it's not completely still either. How fast would we expect it to spin? And then that's the average length of a day. Now, all that's doing in a typical planet, all that's doing is just saying, look, the fundamental constants make a big difference to the universe around us. So if you change them, you would change some of the stuff around us. It's not a fine-tuning paper. It's not used in any fine-tuning paper to put a limit on what the properties of our universe need to be for life. It's just an interesting little thing of physics that you can do this back-of-the-envelope calculation that gives you, in terms of the fine-tuning constants, something like how long is a day? How long would a planet held up by its own internal forces take to rotate?
So did Victor cite Page's his paper? Is that where you're going with this? Is that where he got the day thing, or? Yeah, so I still don't understand what's happening.
In his study, Victor uses that and one other criterion that I've forgotten, I could look it up, as criterion for the universes that he creates. Mm-hmm. That in order for them to be sufficiently similar to ours, which is apparently what he thinks fine-tuning is, they have to have a day which is kind of similar in length to ours, which is just clueless. No one's arguing that. Anyway, so there's 2 of those. in one of them, you can go back to the reference he's got for, and there's the criterion he should be using, but for reasons that I assume he didn't understand it, he uses the equation above, which is the wrong equation. He should have used and then 3 of them are just straight up wrong. They're literally incorrect. One of them he's pulled out a Barrow and Tipper, and he's just written the equation out wrong. Anyway,
well, and it's not like it's not like Arvin didn't have access to. I mean, he could have just looked up like Sean Carroll. Like, what are Sean Carroll's critiques of the fine tuning argument?
Yeah.
That's the way that he could have gone.
Yeah,
Sean Carroll is not. I mean, he's probably more popular than Victor Stenger. I mean, at least in the circles that I'm in. Yeah, it's just very interesting to select Victor Stenger in this study.
Just to finish off, the other thing he does, so he picks a whole bunch of values for fundamental constants and then sees whether they satisfy a certain set of criteria.
Mm-hmm.
But as we said, one of them was like, how long is a day, which is completely irrelevant and weird. But then he misses out all the most cases. Big Bang nucleosynthesis, star formation, galaxy formation, whether hydrogen is stable, whether it's stable to electron capture, whether it's stable to decay into a neutron, whether you could have stable structures at all, sort of various instabilities inside atoms, whether stars are stable, the triple alpha process for making carbon in our universe, whether stars burn quicker because there's the diproton or the deuteron is unbound. All the interesting cases are just completely ignored in favor of 2 that are irrelevant, 3 are wrong, and 1 that's in sort of a weaker condition when he should have chosen a stronger one. And on top of that, Arvin says in this, he varies these constants by 5 orders of magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is obviously because he thought that was a big number of magnitudes. But the masses of the fundamental particles are smaller than their sort of natural scale by more than 5 orders of magnitude. It's just completely a number pulled out of nowhere. And the other thing he does, which is wrong, is you're supposed to look at, here's the possible range of values, and here's where the life-permitting bit is, and look at the ratio of those 2 is a first attempt. What Stenger does is look where our universe is and then vary things around our universe.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, automatically you've put us in the middle, which is exactly what you're not supposed to be doing. I could rant an awfully long time about this, but the model is just utterly
he just
meaningless.
gets it all wrong.
There's a reason it would have been laughed out of any physics journal. He could have said, but that's apparently the only thing that Arvin Ash has read on this topic.
Well, he did quote someone else, or at least mention someone else, John Leslie. So let's get to that clip real quick.
Philosophers like John Leslie of the University of Guelph think that the universe had multiple tries before we happened to exist.
That's still funny. I laughed the first time, and I'm still laughing now. John Leslie has sent me some really lovely emails. He read this. So John Leslie wrote a book called Universes,
which I have on my bookshelf somewhere.
It is required reading if you're into fine tuning. It's really great. Still 1989, but still like really, really good. Sent me some really lovely emails that he'd read this, and he was like, "Oh, great! Someone who gets it and is still looking at this interesting field." But Leslie, Arvin Ash is trying to introduce the multiverse as an alternative to God. And the person he chooses to use that is not a physicist or a cosmologist. He goes to Leslie and saying, Leslie says that, hey, as a philosopher, maybe there are all these other universes out there. Leslie believes that there are infinitely many divine minds, and each of them created a universe. He believes in infinitely many universes because he believes in infinitely many gods. That's the guy that Ash quotes. as oh, here's this other idea rather than God of the multiverse. It's just baffling to
It's
me.
an interesting person to use as
Yeah. So I should say, Leslie, the way he gets there is he thinks fundamental kind of thing in the universe. This is my very rough paraphrase of what he thinks. What he thinks is not a ridiculous thing. I'm not saying Leslie's idea is ridiculous. I'm saying Ash quoting Leslie is just bizarre. Here's roughly what Leslie is doing. So if you're a naturalist or a materialist, you say that the most basic thing is sort of physical stuff. If you're a theist, then the most basic thing is more like mind than anything else. Well, like, you get in all sorts of trouble when you say anything like that. But God is more like a mind than like anything else. Yeah, come at me, Thomas. What Leslie wants to say is that actually moral obligations are enough for something to exist. That they so there are infinitely many gods because it is good that a god would exist and then God would create because it's that really explain this idea very well. But that's the path that he's...
So, well, the point is that it's not a ridiculous theory, or it's not a ridiculous view that he's got. He's got all of these different arguments and inferences that are at play and working here, right?
Yeah.
That I take it is your point. You want to kind of defend John Leslie a little bit and say that he's not a complete moron.
I'm not at all criticizing Leslie. Go read his stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff I disagree with is at least interesting stuff. But this is just more evidence. This video is clueless about all of the topics that it touches, even to the point of citing someone who thinks there are infinitely many gods. Anyway,
because of fine tuning. Yeah. All right, let's get on to number 10. We've got 2 more clips to go, and then we'll close it out. So we're nearing the end here. All right, here is clip number 10.
Many scientists believe that science may someday have a theory from which the values of the existing physical constants can be derived or explained. What looks like fine-tuning may really be due to our ignorance of the underlying mathematics that would explain these constants.
I mean, yeah, but it misses the point of the argument. I mean, here's the way I try to think about it. We want to know whether there's sort of anything interesting or remarkable or noteworthy about this universe. And so we go as deep as we can into the laws of physics to see whether there's anything interesting or remarkable or noteworthy down there. And fine-tuning looks like exactly that sort of thing. Now, have we reached the deepest level of knowledge of the universe? Almost certainly not. But, we can't go any deeper than as deep as we can go given the knowledge we have. So it is, in particular, if we go to, say, sort of what we know right now, okay, and it's got these constants in it, and then, major breakthrough happens in physics and we explain all of that down here, well, then we'll go down here and see whether there's any evidence of fine-tuning down here, and maybe there will be. I mean, maybe when we look at the deeper level of constants in whatever the real fundamental theory is, we'll find fine-tuning there as well. In the absence of any specific information about what's down there, we just don't know. And so the fine-tuning argument is following the best information we have and taking it seriously. This objection is just a last-ditch appeal to ignorance to try and get out of it.
Maybe we're going to have this at some point, and that, therefore, yeah. Okay, let's get to the last clip. Actually, before that, let me mention something real quick, and I'll talk to the audience for a second. So this is a crowd-funded ministry. This doesn't happen. This YouTube channel, Capturing Christianity, all of these interviews and debates that we host and all the videos that we put out, doesn't happen without your support. So if you would like to help make sure that this thing keeps going, keeps running, more videos come out, patreon.com/Capturing Christianity. The reason why I'm mentioning this now is because we put out a 12 apologetics courses for beginners, a series of courses. And here's just the list. You can pause it and check out all of the ones here. You'll notice a familiar name here, Luke Barnes. See that? Number 6, the fine-tuning argument. So Luke has actually been He taught a course, and it's like the latest, coolest version of the fine tuning argument. He broke it down. He also introduced some really cool cases of fine tuning, and then gave his argument for God in this episode. It was one of my favorite presentations I've seen on the fine tuning argument, and it was on a level that anyone can basically get a hold of, especially if you're interested in any of this and you want to get a better grasp of it. Anyway, so if you support the ministry at $10 or more a month, you get access to all 12 courses. And so, like I said, number 6 is with Luke, our guest today. So, yeah, help support the ministry. If you find this stuff valuable, then appreciate it in advance. All right, let's get to the last clip here. This one is, I think he's kind of like summarizing his whole view about fine-tuning in this little clip here. And here it is.
The fine-tuning argument seems to be saying something analogous to the idea that the sun radiates light so that we can see where we're going. In fact, the human eye evolved to be sensitive to light from the sun because that's what gave us an evolutionary advantage. The sun is not fine-tuned for our eyes are fine-tuned for the sun. Similarly, the universe is not fine-tuned for humanity. Humanity is fine-tuned for the universe.
So he summarizes the whole fine-tuning argument. How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10?
I hear this one a lot, and it's complete ignorance of what the fine-tuning argument is saying. I mean, not only is his application to fine-tuning wrong, the example is wrong. Our eyes did not purely just evolve to the sun. There is a really remarkable coincidence between the amount of energy that is there in a chemical bond and the typical amount of energy that comes out of a photon from a star. And if you think about it, that's kind of interesting. There are no molecules, not really, in the sun. There's no sort of, molecular physics up there. And yet, if you have a nuclear reactor at the center of a sun, it goes off and all the light comes out, it slowly loses energy. By the time it gets to the surface, it comes out, energy in the photon, just the amount of right energy in sunlight to then power, photosynthesis.
Can you back up a little bit? You cut in and out.
Sorry.
Rewind about 3 sentences.
Okay, so there's an interesting coincidence between the amount of energy you need to alter a chemical bond and the amount of energy you get from light from a typical star, like the sun. So it's about, an electron volt, if you're interested. There's that unit again. So, for example, in your eyes, when you see, there's a chemical back there, which is a long chain of molecules, not that long as things go, but it's got a bend in it. You can go look this up. Something cis-retinol, something. If you're a chemist, you know this. So what happens is light hits this molecule, it straightens, and that triggers the light sensors in your eye, sends a signal up to your brain, and that's how you see. Now, if the amount of energy in that particle of light from the sun was much smaller, if it was a radio wave, for example, it would not make the molecule straighten. It would make the molecule wobble a little bit, but that's it. This is why you can't see microwaves or radio waves. On the other hand, if it was an X-ray, if it had much higher energy, it would come in, it would hit that molecule, and it would break it apart. Okay, this is why you don't stare at X-rays. The fact that those two numbers are roughly the same, the energy in a chemical bond and the energy in the light from the sun, the fact that those are sort of the same order of magnitude has to do with coincidence between fundamental constants. You can read it in those papers. So if you're interested, the proton mass to the 3rd power has to be roughly equal to the strength of electromagnetism to the 6th power, the electron mass to the 2nd power times the Planck mass, for a little bit of fun for everybody there. So he's wrong about it. The illustration is wrong. Our eyes couldn't just see. There's no sort of physical system you can set up which can view X-rays and make out of chemicals, which can view X-rays without being destroyed by them because it breaks chemical bonds, unless somehow evolution managed to smelt metal, although even that I think is probably unlikely. And if we want to detect radio waves, we have to again smelt metal. But if you want to make eyes if you want to make something that can see light from the sun using just molecules that can fit neatly into a nice little package on the front of your head here, nice. The sun better put out light at about the same amount of energy as the energy in these molecules that straighten. So even the advantage is wrong. The illustration is wrong. Of course, evolution uses that, but it doesn't create that coincidence to start with. And so even that example, when you then add it, transfer it over to fine tuning, shows how he's wrong about fine tuning.
As an analogy to the fine tuning argument, where does it go wrong though? Like this analogy.
The problem is,
suppose that the analogy wasn't, or the illustration wasn't wrong.
Yeah. If talking about here is physics, so physics is deeper than biology, right? Deal with it. So what we're talking about here with fine tuning is, what does a universe need to do before any form of life could exist at all? You have to be a form of life before you can evolve into something else. So saying we evolve to fit this universe, there has to be life first in this universe before it can evolve to fit into this universe. It is absolutely not true that you could just make any old universe and life would be, some form of life would be fine. It would just turn up. This is exactly what fine-tuning is talking about when you actually read the sodding literature. As Cam was saying before, you can easily make universes in which no particle ever touches another particle. If you watch that universe, you're not going to see anything evolve into anything. Nothing's going to adapt to that universe. A proton in empty space with just 1 trillion light years of nothing around it isn't going to adapt. But that's the situations we're talking about with fine-tuning. So just saying something like, oh, humanity, we evolved for this universe we're in. I mean, it's true, but it just has nothing to do with fine-tuning at all.
It's really confusing to me what his view actually is. Like, what is he trying to say about fine-tuning? Is he trying to say that there is no fine-tuning? That these cases are actually not that big? They're sort of overblown, so fine-tuning isn't really a big thing. But it's not clear if that's his view, or if his view is, hey, we got this multiverse option. Or maybe we're gonna have this theory of everything. Like, I don't know what his view is. Yeah. I didn't get it like a consistent, coherent take from him.
I think one of the problems here is that he possibly has in mind a kind of young Earth creationist style, God just the universe into existence with everything exactly where it is and perfectly aligned. And what the evolutionists will say to that is, well, actually, things adapt to the scenario, the situations they're in, evolution, all that sort of stuff. But that's just nothing to do with fine-tuning at all. I mean, the question is, naturalists keep telling us that this is just any old universe, just there's nothing special about this universe. And we are trying to test that idea by going to the fundamental layers of physics and just changing things around and seeing if there really is anything different or unusual or rare about this universe.
All right, so I hadn't planned on doing any Q&A or anything, but someone did send in a $20 super chat. There was actually a couple, but there was one that was actually pretty nice, and it had to do with you being from the same country. Anyways, here it is. I'm putting it on the screen now. Pip Chat Noir says, joining 14 minutes late, maybe this week. Good day, Luke. As you sound like you come from the best place on planet Earth, the fine-tuning argument is proven through the existence of Australia.
Australia. That's how you pronounce Australia. as a true Australian. You just sort of it just slides out of the
You just
mouth.
straw.
Australia. Yeah.
Straw.
You're probably doing too much there anyway.
Oh, I'm using too much of my mouth.
Yeah, so even like
Straw.
g'day. Like I find Americans when
G'day.
they try and do that, just enunciate it. Like they put too much effort in. It's just got to slide out like g'day.
G'day. All right,
Like,
I'll just
yeah.
use my mouth or
It's
vocal cords.
You're a Texan. It's very hot. Just sort of imagine it's hot here as well. Just g'day. Yeah, someone made a joke to us in the book that there's this objection to fine tuning. How can the universe be fine tuned if so much of it is inhospitable to life?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, well, then go imagine a universe where it's all like that, and you'll understand fine tuning maybe a bit better. But Robin Collins, I think, actually said to me, it's a bit like saying, why would anyone live in Australia? So much of it is desert. It's like, that's a good point, actually. The non-desert bits are perfectly lovely.
Yeah.
And even the deserts aren't that bad. So, yeah.
All right. Well, if we're going to do some Q&A,
I'm happy to answer a few questions. That's fine if people are super chatting.
Okay, yeah, we got another. This one is $20 super chat, so thank you. And it's the same person, it looks like. He says, after several interruptions, I'm 17 minutes behind this live show. Have you spoken about Carbon-12 and Fred Hoyle, his work into this that supposedly turned him from an atheist to a believer in fine-tuning?
So that's a little bit misleading. He was an atheist and remained an atheist. He never. I don't think he ever became any sort of believer, but certainly he did notice this weird thing about carbon-12. So the coincidence is, it's a little bit hard. It's a little bit technical to explain, but basically there needs to be a very precise property of this one particular nucleus, carbon, in order for stars in our universe to produce carbon, which then we're made out of, right? Stars are the factories for nuclear, for different nuclei for the periodic table. Yeah, very odd, very striking. He said something along the lines of, Hoyle said something along the lines of, it seems like a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. But I think that was just his sort of first impression. That's not what he thought about the universe. Famously, he didn't believe in the Big Bang Theory for his entire career. One of the great astrophysicists of the 20th century, but never bought into this whole Big Bang Theory thing.
Interesting. Did you talk about that in your new book?
We do a bit, yeah. So nice little segue. So we've got a new book
trying
out.
To help you out, bro.
Geranium again. Yeah, I should have done this myself. So this is called the Cosmic Revolutionary's Handbook,
which I'm going to interview. I'm going to interview Luke about this book coming up in maybe a month or so. So yeah, it is going to happen. We're going to talk about it.
Yeah. So short story is it's about we keep getting emails. This is emails from people saying, I've got this theory that's heaps better than the Big Bang, and it's going to revolutionize cosmology. And we keep having to write the same sort of email back saying, look, we appreciate your interest, but you have to actually do some maths, or you have to explain more than one observation or something like that. So, yeah, we deal with a lot of that in the book.
Cool. Yeah, we'll get to that, and we'll do a whole interview on it. All right, here is one from Maverick Christian. What's going on, Wade? He says, Arvin Ash's video is like a grad student writing a rebuttal to the fine-tuning argument the night before the paper is due.
Yeah. Hey, man. Yeah, this is what's annoying. If someone had just written that, it's almost like a YouTube comment of, here's something I thought of, is this interesting? Or a Facebook comment or something like that. Except that, I mean, full marks, 10 out of 10, for the visuals in the standing. It kills me that this.
You broke up. I didn't hear your joke.
Yeah, I mean, just full marks, 10 out of 10 for Ash's visuals in his video. They're astoundingly good. And yeah, it's just kind of depressing that it got that many views. There are science channels out there who really do check up their stuff. So the great one called Veritasium with Derek Moller. Someone look it up and put it in the chat. Who he was at Sydney University, and so one of his contacts, he has a whole bunch of contacts within the world of physics. So if he's going to do a video about, he did one about expanding space recently, and he knows Geraint, and so he's on Zoom calls with Geraint with the script, checking over all the details. Is this right? Is that right? There are people out there doing videos like that, but there's no way Ash did that with anyone who knows anything about fine tuning. I mean, maybe some other complete amateur who doesn't know about fine tuning either, but there's no way this got checked by anyone. And yet he put the time in to actually, Veritasium, that's how you spell it. He actually put the time in to produce this really lovely produced video with, it's depressing.
Well, I mean, okay, what can you say? I guess you did already kind of say something good about it. What is there any like good takeaway from this video apart from the visuals?
I really struggle just because just reading some of the YouTube comments below his video, people are saying, "Oh, this looks like a really good sort of balanced presentation about fine tuning," and that killed me because it's not. Like, so I've presented the fine-tuning argument. If you want someone to present the other side really well, there's Sean Carroll, there's a bunch of atheist philosophers who've got good papers on this, Neil Manson.
You had a discussion with Alex Malpass.
Yeah. Those are the
which was a really fun discussion. I listened to that recently. It was good. I think you were even sick, but you still did a great job. You were.
Yeah. So there's two sides to this debate, and Ash's video is neither of them.
Man, I wish Luke wasn't cutting in and out so much. It looks like he's just completely gone away.
I've frozen.
There you
I'm
are.
back.
It happens at least once a stream where like most of the time you're just like kind of like in and out a little bit, but then sometimes it's just like.
Sorry, I mean Anyway. Point being, Ash's video, if you've read this video, if you've seen this video, you haven't got both sides. You haven't even got one side. You haven't got either the fine-tuning argument itself or any of the good objections that are worth talking about the fine-tuning argument. It's just so, and the problem is it's presented so sort of remarkably well, but that people think they know what this argument is and what's wrong with it, and they don't.
Not even close.
It's just depressing.
All right, there was another super chat that came in, and I don't know how many others we'll be able to get to tonight, but this one at least. Don't we only know what counts as fine-tuning given the broad range of physics that already exists? From Anglican Aesthetics.
I'm not really sure what that means. So if you want to, I'm sort of following the chat, Anglican Aesthetics, if you want to follow up on that. Let me just guess. Well, only know what counts as fine-tuning given the broad range of physics that already exists. So I think what you're asking is, so as I've presented it, and inevitably, fine-tuning argument is within the context of modern physics. It's an attempt to just say, all right, let's do the best we can with what we know about the universe, because there's been 100 years of atheists just saying, what we've discovered about the universe tells us that this is just any old universe and we're just accidents and we're just collocations of atoms, I think is the phrase that Bertrand Russell uses. So okay, let's go and actually have a look at the deepest laws of physics that we know, and to see what things could have been like, to see whether there is anything interesting about this universe. So, is what we are looking at.
Yeah, this question almost. I think I know what he's trying to get at, and it almost sounds like he's saying, we know of the laws of nature in our universe, but maybe some other universe has different laws of nature. Could be different universes that are possible life-permitting universes with different laws of nature. as opposed to like expressions of those laws. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, possibly. Again,
I mean, it's a possible interpretation. He says that he could clarify. If you could, you should.
Please try. So I think, yeah, we're trying to just let's look at what we know and do the best we can with what we know. It's very hard. There's a way to be systematic looking through the other constants in a way that's very difficult to be systematic laws. It's just a hard thing to wonder about how we're doing.
You're gonna have to repeat the last thing you just said.
There's a way, if we're trying to look at other ways the universe could have been, there's a way to be systematic about looking through different values of the constants. Like, here's a number, change the number. But it's much more difficult to think about a systematic way of looking through all the possible equations or laws or whatever that describe the universe at a deeper level. That's just harder to do. We seem to have a reply. Sorry, Anglican Aesthetics says, it seems feasible that God could have created a completely different set of laws under which different kinds of
life forms. Yeah, that seems to be the interpretation that I just gave. And what you just responded to.
So we know that carbon-based life forms couldn't exist under such and such conditions. So I think under which different kinds of life. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that's the same.
I don't think that affects the argument. I think all that matters is, so here's the sort of the set of possibilities. Put them all on Post-it notes on a great big wall, right? Here's all the ways that the universe could have been. All that fine-tuning says is that only very small parts of the wall, ridiculously small parts of the wall, will allow the existence of life, or any conceivable form of life. It doesn't say that our part of the universe is the only part that could conceivably have life. Like, if there's a way to make life over here somewhere, somewhere else, yeah, that's fine. As long as the collective size of those life-emitting bits is small, that's all the fine-tuning argument is saying. So the fact that that's a possibility is fine. There is an objection here, which Sean Carroll's actually raised in various places, which is God wouldn't have to fine-tune the universe at all. God could have just made any old universe and then just made life exist in it anyway. And I have tried to point this out to him. I'm not sure. I think that for him, given his view of the laws of nature, that's actually contradictory. He can't say that, because what he says, the laws of nature just are a description of how the universe is. So you can't have the laws of nature one way and the universe behave a different way. That makes no sense on his view of the laws of nature. But there's a paper I've written recently called A Reasonable Little Question, which you can go look up, actually based on a blog post for certain Capturing Christianity blog. There's a longer answer to that objection there if people want to look it up.
All right, let's get to here's another super chat, and this will be our last one for the evening, and it's afternoon where you're at. All right, here it is. What does Barnes think of combining alien/non-divine designer and multiverse as a non-theistic explanation?
If you've got a non-divine designer, I mean, what's the multiverse doing there, and what's the designer doing? The point of a multiverse is kind of to avoid both of them, to avoid the designer. Let me just do that in. Let me assume those are two. Oh no, it does say combining. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, a non-divine designer. I actually think the fine-tuning argument in and of itself doesn't give us a particularly strong reason to think that it's a divine designer, but that's why if I was just doing a case for God from scratch, I'd start with the contingency argument and then go to the tuning. I think the fine-tuning argument's good, but if you want a God out of it, I think it doesn't quite get there. But that's just what the argument proves. That's just the way it is. Yeah. And the multiverse, so again, the paper, A Reasonable Little Question's got my sort of response to the multiverse there. I think once we're thinking at the level of let's just look as deep as we can into physics, the fact that you could invent some more physics and imagine some other way the universe might have turned out on a much larger scale is just kind of speculation that doesn't answer the question that we have about the universe we have. So in terms of combining those two, I'm not sure what the advantage is. If you've got a designer, you can just pick the universe that designer wants out of the set of possibilities, and then you don't need a multiverse. Or the other way around, if you've got a multiverse, why bother with a non-divine designer?
Yeah, maybe it's just sort of multiplying causes beyond necessity is one way of putting it. So
we've got to follow up.
Razor.
The designer
From
would
Mickey?
avoid... Yeah.
I've got it on the screen now. The designer would avoid the entropy issue with the multiverse. A multiverse would help guarantee aliens in some universe.
Oh, okay. No, I think if you're a designer that's subject to the laws of nature, then second law of thermodynamics is the law. Sorry, you're not going to avoid the entropy issue. I mean, I'm a designer, to some extent, but I'm still subject to the second law. That doesn't work. You've got to be, in that case, it would need a divine, as a designer that is truly not subject to the laws of nature. If everyone could go and read paper that Geraint and I published 2 days ago called Under an Iron Sky, the entropy at the start of the universe. Doesn't that sound interesting? Which isn't on this, but I'd love a whole bunch of people to read it because I think it's really good. So I don't think you can avoid entropy issue with the designer, but a multiverse will sort of put a whole lot of different conditions everywhere. So aliens turn up somewhere. I hope I hope that's clearish.
Well, let me do this one last thing. I noticed the comment here, and I think it deserves a response. Danny says, I don't understand. If Luke thinks fine-tuning doesn't get you a god, then what is the point of fine-tuning? Seems like a dodge. Are you dodging, Luke? Are you dodging?
A dodge. I think it gets you very close. Depends how you want to do it. I think if you do a straight-up theism versus naturalism,
like what Robin Collins does.
Those two up against each other, then it does, but that's because you're testing theism, so you've got it there from scratch. I think it's if you put theism up against, which is a theism up against a sort of non-divine designer who is above the laws of nature as we know them, but still subject to some meta laws or something, still in some way a physical being. The arguments I would put forward against that to say that theism is better than that hypothesis isn't the fine-tuning argument. I'd have to rely on a different argument. That's all I'm saying. So I think in the sort of field of live options, theism, non-divine designer, naturalism, whatever else you're thinking of, I think the fine-tuning argument wipes out naturalism and put some real question marks over a couple of other things. So in that case, it's narrowing a field down where theism is a big part of the field that sort of survives the fine-tuning argument. So I don't, I
so it narrows down the possibility space.
Yeah, thing.
One way of putting it. All right, well, that's going to do it. So thank you guys for tuning in. Is there anything you'd like to leave with the audience? We've mentioned your books. We talked about your blog post. Definitely go check out his blog. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, I've got his blog linked in the description of this video. So just do the little drop down, click the link, and you can subscribe to his blog and get all of his other things that he's written about. But also, it's just going to be a helpful companion if you want to get some more detail on some of the things that were discussed in this video. So definitely go check that out. It's really, really helpful, actually. It's actually even a little bit more spicy than what we saw tonight here. So if you're interested in spice, very, very high levels of spice from our man Luke Barnes here, I recommend going and checking that out. But just in general, his blog is awesome. It's called Letters to Nature. It's awesome. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Luke. I'm really looking forward to our next conversation.
Excellent. The internet is better.
Yeah, it was like cutting in and out. Yeah, we'll hopefully we'll see. I'll send you some stuff and maybe I can get you a little bit of better speed with some different technology. Anyways, all right, we will see you guys later. Until the next video.
Thanks,
See ya.
everyone.